Hello, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to a very special historians interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is a returning Wandering Scribe alumni. Now, many of you will remember her from being the headliner of my Historians Lounge series all the way back, if I remember correctly, it was either, I believe, season one, if I'm not mistaken. Because, yeah, going on now season four. And we talked about, the American Revolution and the legacy of Nathaniel Greene. And then more recently, she came back on the show for a follow-up historians interview. And now joining us back here on the show is an incredible historian, amazing professor, and poet and screenwriter, ladies and gentlemen, an all-around amazing person. And I am so happy to have her back on the show. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, Professor Joyce Boyd. Joyce, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's always good to be with you and see you, Gabriel.
Absolutely, Joyce. Absolutely. So, before we dive into this very special interview, would you like to share with the viewers and listeners what you've been up to since the last time you were on the show?
Well, the last time I was on the show, I was taking care of a disabled husband. So a lot of my writing, I was still teaching, but a lot of my writing was kind of on hold. And then he passed away. He is in heaven, totally healed, thank God. And but I had to move out of the area that I lived in because I couldn't afford to live there anymore. So the college said, well, we will give you online classes no matter where you live. So that was just a huge blessing. So I continue to teach history online, which I really like. I miss it a little bit in person, but it gives me a lot of flexibility of schedule. And since then, I found a great church. I met a great guy. I got married last year. And life is going really well, and I have the freedom and a lot more time now to work on my writing. So I've kind of expanded the few things I was working on previously. Now I have about 3 or 4 books that I switch back and forth between. I have a Bible study book that I'm working on now as well, like a devotional kind of book. I also started writing more poetry. And I'm going to be actually setting that to music, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm hoping by in the next couple of months or by this summer to launch a YouTube channel that has more information about me and has my poetry on there set to music. So I'm excited about the possibility of that. I'm hoping to get a script option this year. I have several scripts that I'm working on, and a few contacts in the industry. So I'm hoping and praying that God will work that out. We'll see. They're mainly faith-based. So I'm just excited. I feel like sort of a new leaf has turned over, and I've been busy doing stuff I want to be busy doing versus busy doing stuff I have to do. So that's been nice.
Well, that's good, Joyce. I'm glad that you are continuing working on your passions and just expanding new horizons. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
Now, for those that may not know about you, as you mentioned earlier, you, besides teaching history, you've also now begun dabbling in, poetry as well as script writing. Can you share with the viewers and listeners, like, how that came about and what have you learned from it? As an historian, we're taught to write, very analytically and research based, but poetry and script writing is a little bit more on the creative side. So how did that come about? How did those two avenues present themselves to you?
Well, the poetry in particular, I really started writing that when the last couple of years that my husband was ill while I was taking care of him. It was kind of a creative outlet for me because I kind of watched him deteriorate, especially over the last 2 years before he passed away. And that was really hard just watching that. It was like long-term grieving. And then so that was kind of my escape. He had short-term memory issues, and
Mm,
so we would have a conversation and then he would forget that we had it. And it was a little, like, it was a little mind-boggling to me, but also I kind of understood it. People would be like, well, Joyce, why don't you put him in like a care center, or why don't you, because it got really hard, especially that last year got very, very difficult. But we already knew that the condition, they said the longest anyone had lived was 10 years and the average was 4 to 6. And when he died, it was about, he'd had it for about 5 years, been diagnosed for about 5 years. So I would tell them, I said, I made a vow, not just to Dawn, but to God, and I'm going to keep it. And if something happens to where I actually cannot take care of him, then I will look at that option. But that was never my goal, because I knew that he was going to pass away. I knew it wasn't going to, I knew there was like an end in sight for his life ending, which was sad and heartbreaking at the same time that it was like, I wanted to be there for him as his wife, because I said that's what I would do. And early in our marriage, when I was at home, a stay-at-home mom and having kids, and he worked really hard to take care of our family. And I figured this is the least that I can do, is take care of him. But, it was hard. And poetry, I wrote poetry when I was younger, like in junior high and high school, but it really came back really strong, I think, because it was a way to help me through that grieving process. And then after he passed away, I wrote even more. And then, just dealing with the day in and day out of what's going to happen and when is it going to happen, and that kind of thing. So that was how the poetry really got started. And then I just fell in love with that whole outlet. So I've written quite a bit since then. So that was that. I actually started writing screenplays several years before Don was even diagnosed. And then it just kind of got put on hold when he got sick. So I had an interest in that. In fact, one producer that I had a meeting with on Zoom during the COVID era told me, your writing is really good. You're really funny. Your dialogue is really quippy. And then they would give me guidelines. But it was kind of funny because he said, so you're a historian, so you probably go watch movies and get really irritated that things aren't historically accurate. And I completely, I think, surprised him, because I said, no, I don't care that much, honestly, about historical accuracy, because the only way that things come across to a viewer in a movie is action and dialogue. So you can't have somebody standing there thinking about, what should I do in this battle? They have to do something, or they have to say something, or it doesn't translate to the screen. And I said, my view as a historian, and there's lots of debate about this, is if you watch a play like Hamilton, or if you watch, a movie like any historical movie at all, if you are compelled to be like, oh, wow, I wonder, like, is that accurate? And you go look something up and you learn something awesome. That, if it's not historically accurate, that's okay, because creativity does come into mind. And sometimes you have to put composite characters together, and so so he was really surprised by that, which kind of surprised me. I was like, no, I don't, it does, as long as you're saying, oh yeah, like there's a thing in screenwriting where it's like based on actual events, inspired by events, that kind of thing. There's like levels of that where you can say, or based on a true story, then that's probably pretty close to what accurately happened. But if you're like inspired by, then, but if it makes people learn and go look stuff up and learn something, then awesome. That's great. Hollywood is not the avenue by which we should be learning history anyway, or any movie, company, regardless of where they come from, international, indie, whatever. But if it makes you want to learn something about it, then awesome. That's great. And we've had more movies like that recently, like the one about the nun from Europe that went to New York and took care of the orphan. Those kinds of movies are
Mother Cabrini.
Cabrini, that, which was excellent. I have students almost every quarter choose like a movie or a book to highlight and do an assignment on, and I'm like, I don't want a plot rundown. I've probably already seen it. I want you to tell me, is it historically accurate? Isn't it? Why or why not? What choices did they make? How has it endured? in culture, because art imitates life and vice versa all the time. And so so because I want them to think about history from different points of view and not be just bored, wrote, this happened on this date. Nobody likes that. And I never test on dates for that reason. I didn't like it when I was in school. I'm not going to do that to my students. I want to know, like if you do an assessment, one student, it was really funny, did an assessment of Disney's Pocahontas and ripped it to shreds. And they got a good grade on the paper. It's like, you can tell me you like it or you don't like it, but just back up what you're saying, and talked about how totally historically inaccurate it was and just ripped it a new one. It was so much fun reading that. And then I had another student who did a paper on Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I'm like, if you're not sure, ask me. And he's like, oh, can I do Lincoln Vampire Hunter? And I'm like, sure. He goes, I thought you were going to say no. And I'm like, tell me what you got. And he wrote a really good paper on that and pointed out some of the fun things about it. And obviously, it's not historically accurate, but it was kind of fun to be able to read what he wrote and how he tied content from this totally campy semi-horror movie to class content that was historically based. So yeah, I like to do fun things like that.
And that's amazing, Joyce. That is amazing. Now, going back again to your poetry, I've had a few poets on the show who have told me that unlike, screenplay writing or writing a novel where it's very planned out or very outlined, poetry is very spontaneous. It's usually based upon an emotion or feeling you have at the moment. When you were writing your poetry, was it very spontaneous for you?
Yes, it was. I would find myself either in a situation or struggling with something, and I would feel just compelled to just write out, that, and then I would, sometimes it would happen instantly, and other times I would work on it, go back, work on it over a few days or whatever. But yeah, it was very, very spontaneous and very emotional. Like, there were a lot of times stuff I wrote, there was lots of tears, and it was very cathartic, like very healing, especially after in the last days, and then when Dawn was gone. And it was very, very, I wrote so much in my journal. I'm a sort of I journal like a crazy person. And I would go back later and read some of that and just be like, wow, you can tell that came from a place of deep sorrow or deep grief or deep love, or whatever. And sometimes I'll go back and read something I wrote poetry wise, and I'm like, I can't even believe that came out of me. I felt like it was almost supernatural. Some of the things that I've written were just so, and I've given poems. I now will sign poems and give like a certificate of authenticity and put them in a frame and stuff as like for gifts. Like, I have a friend who's about to have a baby boy, and I wrote a poem for her baby boy, and then I give it as a gift, and then I number it just in case I ever want to sell them or anything, so they know, oh, you have, one poem I've already given out like 8 or 10 copies, so they have a thing that says, oh, you have like 008 of /100 or 500. I started doing that because somebody said, you want to make sure that you have a record of that, and that made sense because I'm not business minded, really. I'm way more on the creative side than I am on the, being organized and analytical, and all that. Teaching has taught me to be better at that. But yeah, so the poetry, very spontaneous. Sometimes my husband and I will be in the car and I'll start typing on my phone, and he's like, poet or notes for a story. he knows me so well now. I'm like, oh, I got to get this down before I forget.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Nice. So now let's talk a little bit more about your screenplay. Now, as you mentioned earlier, you have written like how many, 3 or 4 screenplays at the moment? And I'm very curious. Again, screenplay writing is very different from, writing a book or a novel. It's a very specific structure and design.
Right.
So as you were initially dabbling into screenplay before writing full-fledged scripts, What really surprised you about that avenue of the creative side? Writing scripts that could potentially turn into films.
Well, I think what surprised me in a good way was how, as a writer and as somebody who likes to be very descriptive, I tend to probably do more detail. I had a really good teacher in college that said, write it and then cut it in half. So that sort of prepared me for the screenplay world, as it were. And I haven't had anything optioned yet. Hopefully that will happen. Um, but what you can, what surprised me in a really good way was what you can say by either not really saying anything, or let me explain better. Um, like, for instance, my daughters and I had a conversation about one of my daughters about how many different ways in the movie they say "I love you." Like you have
Hmm.
to hello and that kind of stuff. So those kinds of things, and how you can, in a script, you can actually say a lot on a white page. Like they say, the more, for screenplays, the more white space on a page, the better. Because they don't want a lot of description. They don't want to, they want you have to make your dialogue really tight for it to work and to hold a viewer's attention. I mean, we have all sat through a movie and we're like, oh my word, how on earth did this get made into a movie? This is terrible. Well, probably because, their uncle produced it or whatever. And it's not bad to have family connections, but that's, when you say, well, how come so many bad movies get made? It's because they're already in the industry, and somebody who's at the bottom of that food chain, which is a reader, is going to be like, unless I really believe this can sell, if this is a new person, I'm not putting it forward, because it can be my job if it doesn't sell. Like if we put
Yes.
$1 billion into it and then it flops and we can't get it made and we can't get it produced and we can't get any, so we threw away, burned up $1 million. So they're very, very, they're very careful, and it has to be really, screenplays really force you to be very top notch in your dialogue, and very very streamlined, even with like your action. And you have to, even, and I'm not a budget person, except for myself, I'm a budget person, but even as a writer, you have to have budget in mind. Like how many, so one of my screenplays is actually based on what happened to my husband Don, because the condition he had was so rare. So it's a faith-based, tension heavy with comedy kind of thing, but you have to think, how many uh, scenes, like settings, am I going to have in this? Because every setting is money. So if you can get a basic script down to like 3 to 5 scenes, like a bedroom, an office, a coffee shop. And you see that a lot in, like, anybody who watches like the famous, I call them famous kind of in quotes, like Lifetime movies. They have a
Yes.
very, they only produce movies that do da 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 da, this order, and it's, so they're very formulaic, and you think, how can you be creative within a formula? But we all go to formulaic movies. If you're a Top Gun fan, I saw Top Gun, I think 7 times in the theater, because it was so good. But that is so formulaic, rom-coms, romantic comedies are all extremely formulaic, but they're
Absolutely.
huge. People go see them. So we're like, oh, be creative, da, 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 but if you're too creative and the audience can't figure out what you're doing, no one's going to see it. No one's going to buy it. No one's going to make it. No one's going to star in it. So being disciplined enough to be like, I'm going to take this big idea and break it down into what they call like an elevator pitch. If I'm in an elevator with a producer and he says, tell me what your script is about, can I do it before we get to the 4th floor? Or am I standing there explaining everything? So that really, I think it's helped my writing on the writing side versus screenplay side become more succinct, and it's made me a better writer, because it forces you to sort of cut out fluff that you think, oh, that's so important to my heart, and the reader doesn't care. They don't care where the couch is in the living room. They just want to
Mm.
know what conversation happened in the living room or whatever, So that it's challenging, but I find it also really enjoyable. I love doing it.
Awesome, awesome. So now let's actually turn to your background as a history teacher. And these are a set of questions I'm very intrigued to ask you because I've been thinking about this a lot. And it's on the discussion of, teaching history in the digital age and what that means for us historians. Now, to start off, uh, Joyce, as like an icebreaker question, when you began teaching history remotely, initially, how different was it from teaching in the classroom? Besides the obvious, teaching through a computer, as opposed to being in a classroom with a whiteboard and having that engagement. What was the initial reaction like at that point?
Well, when I first did it, I wouldn't say it was a disaster, but it was there was definitely a learning curve. Um, and I took some classes offered at Pierce for specifically for instructors to be better, like for teaching online and what have you. And I happened to get trained in online teaching at my college, and that was so helpful to me. The hardest thing is when you're in person, you can, there's a certain sense of like the emotion that you can convey in what's happening, and as you're talking, and I talk with my hands and all of that, and you don't get that online. However, I make more videos now. The first time I did it, I didn't do a lot of videos. Um, I mainly put stuff on and had students reply, and like we have discussion things where they have to reply, post their response and then like reply to 2 or more classmates and what have you. So you're trying to build this sense of camaraderie in this online classroom. And I feel like I've been doing it since 2017. And I think in the last almost decade, that it has come a long way. I mean, you can be on a ship in the Persian Gulf and take a class online. You can be in an airplane flying across the sky and turn in homework online. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So that part of it is really good. Uh, the one of the positives about it is I can like blueprint my classes, and everything is mine. I mean, I still retain all of my because I create all my own curriculum. I still retain like
Right.
stuff. It's copyright and all of that. So that is also makes it really nice having things online and just be able to copy this course into this course shell, and it's good to go, and you just have to tweak dates and what have you. That's really nice. But I do miss face-to-face interactions with students. I have had just some stellar students that ask stellar questions in class, and I miss like asking, like I can ask really provocative questions online and they can respond and what have you. Like we just did in one of our final discussion questions was, should the electoral college remain the same? Like, has it outlived its usefulness? Should it be exactly the same? Should it be completely done away with? Or should it be kept but changed in some way? And what would you suggest? And it was like an opinion question. And it's nice to get students, and they can do that online and respond to that. But when you're in the classroom and you have that discussion, it can be very lively, and you have students going back and forth, and I kind of a little bit miss that. But I still get great answers. I remember one student came to me and said that his friend had said, you got to take Pace, because if you ask her, when my name was still Pace, if you ask her a personal question, then she'll talk about something like in her life for like 5 or 10 minutes of class. And I said, yeah, but go back and ask him if I ever tie that into class. And he came back a couple days later and said, yeah, he said you always tie it back into class content. So I actually made up this word of prophestorying, where if it's a prophestory, it's the professor's story from their own life tied into class content. And now it's in the Urban Dictionary.
Awesome. All
So yeah,
right.
that's kind of fun. So I kind of miss the actual interactions with students, but but I do like the flexibility. So there's definitely pros and cons.
Absolutely, very true. Now, you just mentioned also that when you began doing remote instruction, it also kind of forced you to try different avenues, like, making your own content, making videos. And another thing that really applied to a lot of teachers, especially when we went into the COVID years, when
Oh yeah.
everything was remote, it did force a lot of teachers who had never used remote instruction as frequent to try new avenues to keep engagement. And that's another thing I would like to hear your thoughts on. Like, what do you think, again, like the challenges of, keeping engagement in like a remote history setting? Because in a remote setting, and as for like a former student, there were so many avenues that students could have taken to, you know, seem like they are learning, but not learning with everything. So I would just like to hear your thoughts on some of the initial challenges that you dealt with, along the way in terms of like, making content for your students and trying to keep their engagement in a remote setting and then finding your footing.
Yeah. So yeah, that is challenging, especially when it comes to and we as professors, if you're at a college or especially at a university, you have um, tools and safeties that a lot of students don't even know about to guard like against cheating, or there are so many more tools out there now. There's ways that when they go in to take a quiz, it locks their screen and they can't like leave, they can't open any other windows. I mean, there's those kinds of things. It would be nice if everybody was honest.
Hmm.
So that's always a challenge. On the one hand, it's like, it would be nice if you knew everybody was above board, but students aren't above board. In fact, I just read an article recently where something like 60% of students will give their teachers, especially if it's any kind of political discussion, the answer they think the teacher wants to hear and not what they really feel or think, because they figure if I say how I really feel or think, I'm going to be punished through my grade, and I'm trying to get into engineering school or nursing school or law school or whatever, and I can't afford that. So I'm just going to tell them what they want to hear. I don't know that there's any way to combat that. I just don't know that I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how you combat that. I am always upfront with my students. I tell them, if you get caught cheating, and it's not my rule, it's the school's rule, you can get a 0, and you can even get like expelled. That would be the worst, like the top
Right.
punishment. So, that's on you. But I also tell my students, I said, listen, I know not everybody has the same passion for history that I do. You and I could sit and talk about history stuff for 5 hours, no problem.
That is true.
Not everybody is going to feel that way because they want to go build buildings, or they want to go sing songs, or they want to, go practice law or whatever. And they have to have a history class to graduate high school and college. You have to have history. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I try to let my students know this is I teach at a community college, a very high level community college. At one point we were like top in the nation. But trust me, I understand that some of you are literally here just to get a grade. So that's why my goal is to make it the least boring history class you've ever taken. I try to have fun with it. I try to use a lot of humor. And I think that humor and also being real, like sometimes I will make a mistake and I'll be like, oh, now I'm not perfect, or whatever. Even like in grammar and stuff, like I'm not I don't think I'm a super hard grader. If I can tell by what you submit that you got it, oh, awesome, good for you. I'm not going to be like, well, you had this mistake and that mistake, and really this is supposed to, and I've been criticized a few times by other professors. Well, you need to be more stringent about that. And I'm like, you know what? If I was making 6 figures a year at a university, I probably would be. I make extremely way less than that as an adjunct, part-time, on call every quarter. So no, I'm not going to put university pressure on students that have enough pressure on them already. And if they need help, I'm going to help them. I'm not going to help them cheat, obviously, but if they
Right.
need help, like, I'm going to give them chances. If they're like, I was working or I had basketball practice, that's why I'm turning this in late. Okay, I won't mark it late. Like, I try to be very gracious. Me as a person, as a very flawed individual who has made a lot of mistakes, I appreciate and need grace frequently. So I try to live in a state of grace where I give that to my students as well. I don't want them to be like, oh my gosh, I have to get this class under my belt and this professor is awful. I'd much rather than be like, oh my gosh, I got to get this class under my belt, but at least my professor is fair. I would much rather have that because they're going to have a better experience.
Absolutely. Very
Shit
true. Very,
online.
very true. Yeah. And you do bring up something that I think is really important. Like, a lot of the pressures, taking history classes. And, you're absolutely right. Not a lot of students are as into history as some are, but you have to make it enjoyable and have that engagement. Because I think you and I can definitely agree that when we were taught history, it was just names, dates, and places. And
Oh,
we
I
have
know, it's
been,
horrible.
yeah, and we have been fortunate enough to have professors in our lives who have made history a lot more engaging.
Right.
And we ourselves try to reciprocate that. I try to make history enjoyable and engaging through my series and through my writing. And of course, you, Joyce, want to do the same for your lectures and for your instruction. And this brings up a issue that I've been seeing a lot, and a lot of colleagues, some of them in our inner circle, have brought to my attention. And that is, of course, the use of AI in instruction, which is a big, big hot button issue, and
Yeah.
not just the history field, but in all academic fields of its implications.
Right.
Now, I know from a student's point of view and from a university standpoint that AI has only been introduced into academics mainly because some students have used AI generative platforms to
Mm-hmm.
create essays and do all that stuff, which I know a lot of universities have issued a lot of statements. But some people have gone forward, a lot of other historians have gone forward and said that AI could be used as a tool, as it should be, not for creating, but for organizing and brainstorming topics of instruction. And I don't know if you may have encountered that in your academic teachings, or a student has brought that to your attention, or you may have learned it on your own. But I would just like to hear your thoughts on the role AI has now become a part of in academics, and more specifically, history.
Well, I know that our school is starting to put out standards, and there have been some things about here's how you can use AI positively. And I think that's great. Um, I know that, again, we have a professor tool where we can put a paper into a site or whatever, and it will tell us this is a certain percentage generated AI. We are supposed to have very clear AI standards in our syllabi. And I usually say if it's more than 10% and you get caught, you're going to get a 0 on that assignment if it's more than 10% AI. Having said that, I do think there is, excuse me, I do think there is value in AI, like you said, when it comes to like brainstorming, or if a student is struggling with something and they need to organize information. Um, in a manner, um, because let's be honest, history is a writing field and not everybody is a writer.
Yes,
Um, writing,
very true.
yeah, writing is usually either a passion or a chore, or you fall somewhere in between there. For me, it's a passion. I could sit and write all day. It's never, since I was like 12, it's never been a chore for me. My younger brother, pain in the butt. He just was like, he'd rather have his nails pulled out, I think, than have to write something. Um, at least that's how it was when we were younger and we were in school. So I think that there's a place for it. I think there's a lot of questions about it that I don't know how to answer them, or how we can address them. The bottom line for me And I'll use this coming fall as an example because I have fall is when I teach the most. I get the most classes fall quarter. I think I have 4 history classes, 3 or 4 this fall, and they're all online. That means that just in those 4 classes is 125-ish students.
Mm,
Um, and they're all for the same class. So for every written assignment in every class, I have to grade 125 papers or whatever. And so, and you know what? That's okay. I signed up to do that. I don't have a problem with that. However, I'm not going to catch every student that turns something in that's AI. I don't have the ability to do that. I don't have the time to do that. And if I'm being honest, I don't get paid enough money as an adjunct professor to do that. If I was making $179,000 at UW, I would probably be a lot more diligent. But, I have to make my money in fall quarter and then make it stretch the rest of the year. And that's okay. I love my job, and I love my freedom and all of that. But, and that might, I don't know, some people might think that's kind of cynical. But and if students watch this, they're going to be like, oh, take Pace, she doesn't check, or take Boyd, she doesn't check. I do check, but I simply don't have the time every quarter to go over 600 papers to make sure every single one is not AI. I have a student right now. Her paper sounded so good. I checked for AI and it was 0%. That's how good of a writer she was. Now, can you
hmm
imagine out of 125 writers, if 50 of them, if I checked them and they're such good writers that it's 0%, that's 2 hours of my life of grading or more possibly.
That's
um,
true.
you know, so you kind of, I think with any technology, life is, I tell my students all the time, life is about balance, left, right, pro-choice, pro-life, all these different issues, pro-guns, pro-gun laws, pro-2R, all of this stuff, freedom of speech. Life is about balance. We don't have freedom of speech everywhere. We don't. You can think that you do, but you don't. Peaceful protest versus violent protest. Those are 2 different things. So life really is about how do we find balance and how do we try to do the best that we can as a person and help other people do the same. And ultimately, you're held accountable to a higher authority. I'm held accountable to a higher authority. And if you don't believe in a higher authority, that's between you and the higher authority, but I'm held to an account by a higher authority. And I have to do what is, going to honor God in my actions and my dealings and what have you. And I'm not the police. I'm not I'm a history professor. Ultimately, and the other thing I tell my students, if you're cheating and you don't get caught, ultimately that's going to hurt you.
Yes.
Because, if you cheat and you get an engineering degree and a building falls down and people die, that's pretty serious. It might not mess with you that much to cheat on a history exam or a history paper. But at some point, if your attitude is, I'm going to do the least to get by and I'm going to cheat if I can because I just don't want to deal with it. If you're going through life, that eventually it's going to hurt you in relationships. It's going to hurt you in work. It's going to, eventually that kind of attitude will come back to get you. So I just try to encourage my students, please make wise choices. If you need help, ask, please make wise choices. I'm not going to follow you around the rest of your life and harangue you. That's not my job. But just please try to make wise choices.
Absolutely well said, Joyce. Well said. And I like how you just mentioned and kind of just restated that being in the history field is a writing field. You have to know how to write. And this brings up this notion that I remember I had on another show. I want to say it was last year. And it was a discussion of what does the term being an historian actually mean? And I forgot who said in the episode, but this guest ultimately said being a historian, true its core, is not learning how to, name states and places, not about the various eras in history. It
Right.
is about learning how to read primary and secondary sources and applying said knowledge and experience to other avenues. Case in point, being an engineer. You have to know how to read certain documents and apply that with an analytical mind.
Exactly.
And same thing for any field. Let's say you want to be work as a lawyer. A lawyer definitely has an historian's background to a degree. To work in the medical field has a certain historian degree, because you are reading medical journals. You have to understand the language, the jargon,
Right.
and learn how to write in a very specific way.
Right.
So ultimately, my question to you, Joyce, is this: when you think of the term historian, from your own personal experience, what does that term mean to you?
Well, somebody asked me that recently because I'm currently married to an electrician, a construction electrician that helps build data centers for Microsoft. Um, and we were kind of laughing. I said, well, my husband, Chris, his job literally saves lives. Like he's an electrician. He's trying to make sure people don't die. And I said, my job as a historian is to try to get you to not do stupid things that we have repeated over the years. If you know history, and I know it's an old adage, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. But more than that, it is hard to have an intelligent view in any kind of discussion on almost any topic. And let me just throw out the hottest button topic out there right now with politics and what's going on in the Middle East. If you don't know history, if you don't understand the history of the Middle East, if you don't understand what happened to a bunch of hostages in 1979, if you don't understand that Reagan wanted to do what Trump is doing right now because of what Iran was doing and their threat around the world, and he was sort of stopped, and if you don't understand that Jimmy Carter said, well, at least I kept us out of a war, but we've been in a war for 47 years. If you don't understand some of that context, then you just think, oh, this crazy president just started launching bombs at somebody. It is important in politics and even to have a not hysterical debate with somebody about, well, let's talk about the consequence of that. Let's talk about, well, when this happened, what would you suggest the response be, etc. When our nation was attacked something like 17 times during the Clinton administration and there were no consequences, what does that tell our enemies? When you can say, because I know history, I know of these events and of these actions, I'm able to have, it doesn't mean that we have to agree. It doesn't mean that we think that the whatever decision is made based on those actions has to be the same. It doesn't mean that at all, but it means that we can have a cordial discussion about it and look at different options and different points of view versus, well, I just heard this one thing, so now I'm going to scream at you because you're the enemy. Because that's what it's been boiled down to. And I think a lot of that is because people don't know history.
Well said. And as the saying goes, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. It is
Right.
the oldest phrase in the book, but it is very, very true, Joyce. It is very true. So as we wrap up this incredible interview slash discussion, ultimately, what do you hope people, and also if your students watch this interview, Joyce, what do you want them to take away from not only our discussion on history, but also a little bit more about you?
Well, I would say about me, I would say as a person with 2 master's degrees, I do not know everything and there's always more to learn. And I am just blessed to, you know, to know what I know, but, keep reading and keep learning. I'll be a lifelong learner. I try to be a lifelong learner because there's always more to learn. There's always, more people to meet and more personalities to get to know and all of that. So that would be like for me personally. The other thing I would say is learn to hold yourself accountable. Sometime you're going to be in a situation where it's going to be easy to make an easy choice that's wrong. And online learning has a lot to do with that. You have to be pretty disciplined to do online learning.
Yes.
Because I'm not in your living room going, your thing is late while you're playing, Xbox or whatever. I'm not there. So learn to hold yourself accountable. And every person, regardless of their belief system, their political stance, every single person can do something to try to make their little corner of the world a better place. So I encourage people, students, people in general, regardless of whatever you believe, do something positive, think positive, do something to try to make your little corner of the world a better place, and do it with kindness, not throwing, Molotov cocktails or whatever. Do it with kindness and show deference and be forgiving. Forgiveness and you have to have accountability. I'm not saying don't hold people accountable, but forgiveness and accountability, those two sides of one coin, go a long, long way in being able to survive this life. And of course, for me, it's Jesus Christ. Without him, I would be nothing.
Well said, Joyce. Well said. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this incredible special historians interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to my friend Professor Joyce Boyd for coming back on the show for her third appearance. Now, Joyce, where can people find you on social media just to stay up to date and keep tabs? And if a person wanted to take a class that you are teaching, where can they go to possibly register for classes and get you as a professor?
Okay, I teach at Pierce College, which is in Pierce County, Washington. There's three different, there's two main campuses, and then there's one like on JBLM, and then there's some satellite campuses at some of the high schools. But I'm exclusively online, and we have had students out of state take online classes from Pierce College. We're one of the top colleges in the nation for community colleges, lots of transfer to university type of degrees and what have you. That's where you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't have a lot of social media. I have an Instagram, but I'm about to shut it down because it's an old one from before I got remarried. But I will be more than happy. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm about to go on in the next month or so and get my name changed now that I've got everything else changed finally, which took forever. But I will be posting, and I can certainly email you links and stuff when I get my YouTube set up and whatever else I'm doing. I'll make sure I put that on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me, because I just don't. I had social media for a while, and it takes me down a rabbit hole, and then I don't write, and so I don't have a lot of social media on purpose.
Absolutely. Very, very true. I'll link all that down below in the description of this video. And if you'd like to see Professor Joyce's first two appearances on the channel, I'll be linking them up above for you to go and check out. I urge you all to. Those are some of my favorite episodes by far. And
Thank you, Gabriel.
You're welcome, Joyce. You're welcome. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for your love and support and everything with the channel. As a reminder, if you're in the SoCal area, in the Los Angeles region specifically, I'll be making my first ever big appearance at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books on April 18th. I'll be there at booth 128 from 10 to 12:30 and 3 to 5:30. And I'll be more than happy to talk with you guys further about my books, upcoming works in progress, channel updates, anything like that. So if you want to see me in person, mark it on your calendars. April 18th, Los Angeles Times Festival of Books at USC campus, booth 128. And as always, it's been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Happy Wednesday, everybody, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care. Have a wonderful day.